You have applications that are running in the cloud that aren't protected, and it's your job to fix that. Now, how do I know that? Well, so every day, and I mean every day, I see customers who have data that isn't protected, either because they've created new applications in the cloud or because they're migrating workloads. So you've got workloads that aren't protected. Now, how do I know this is your responsibility? Well, you came to this talk, and you'd only come if this was your job. So we're here today. I'm Stephen Manley, the Chief Technologist here at Druva, and we're going to talk about how to rethink data protection for hybrid and cloud deployments. So let's dive in. So first, I mentioned that every day I see customers that have applications in the cloud that aren't protected. Well, who is Druva and why am I seeing this? Well, Druva is a SaaS data protection company built on AWS, powered by AWS. And we protect data wherever it lives. Endpoints, in the data center, in the cloud, cloud-native workloads, SaaS applications, wherever it is, we protect that data. We bring it into the Druva Cloud Platform, which is powered by AWS. And there, you may look at backup. You may think, well, I want backup plus disaster recovery. And frankly, once you realize you've got your data next to the most powerful compute infrastructure the world's ever known, you start to look at things like data governance and even cybersecurity and how it can help. So Druva is here to help protect your data no matter where it lives, which is why I spend my time talking to customers who desperately need help protecting their data. Now, why is this happening? What's been changing in the world? There, to some extent, has been a data revolution. For the first time in a very long time, the data center is no longer the center of all your data. Now, that isn't to say that the data center still doesn't have some of the most important business-critical, mission-critical applications. It just means that based on a recent survey, only about 40% of your data lives in the data center. So where's it going? Well, some of it is moving to the cloud, like we just talked about, whether using as IaaS or just running applications as you migrate. Some of it is going to endpoints. Now, in this pandemic, a lot of it means user laptops, tablets, phones, those sorts of things. But as we move forward, more and more IoT. And then, of course, there's always things running in cloud applications, Microsoft 365, Slack, Salesforce.com. You've got data everywhere. And why is that so important for somebody who's involved in data protection? Well, because no matter where that data lives, you still face risk. You still face the risk of just something going wrong, either hardware or users or software. You face the risk of somebody having issues and attacking you, or just somebody making a mistake in your environment. So you've got to protect all that data no matter where it lives. And as you look at that, if the data revolution is happening, if you have data in more places and you need to protect that data, well, you've got to start thinking about how you protect it differently too. For the last 20 years, we've really been focused on one thing, which is speeds and feeds. How fast can I back up that data in my data center? Because I'm getting more VMs and more data, and I just need to back it up quickly. And the nice part is in those 20 years, the number of applications, the complexity of environments actually in some degree simplified. It was all virtualization. It was mostly Oracle and SQL. And so protection was just a speeds and feeds game. And yeah, we talked about things like being able to reuse the data. But everyone woke up every day saying, how can I get the biggest, baddest, fastest, smartest backup appliance on the market? But now with the revolution, things are different. Yeah, certainly there's still more data and you still need performance. But with this small data sprawl, with this data spread out all over the place, and in many more applications than we're used to having. Like we said, in the cloud, cloud-native applications, Kubernetes applications, SaaS applications, you need to protect differently. Because if you try to run all that by hand, if you try to set up a big data center environment for each one of those workloads, each one of those locations, well, you don't have the time, money, or resources to make that happen. And so you've got to shift your mindset from just, how can I brute force my way through this, to, is there a service? Is there someone that can help me connect all these dots together? And the thing that actually ties it all together, again, performance matters, but the thing that really ties it all together is intelligence about the environment. And that's why that metadata analytics comes into play. It's about understanding your information so you can make better, smarter decisions about protecting it. So why do you need to protect it? Because you've got data everywhere and bad things can happen. Why do you need to do it now? Because that data sprawl has already hit your environment. And so the question is then, what does that solution look like? And as we talk to customers, the thing that strikes everybody is it's almost a little bit of, here's all the requirements in column A, and here's all the requirements in column B, and the best part of it is they're totally contradictory. So I need centralized control, but I've got to enable self-service. My lines of business are trying to move quickly. I've got to cut my costs because I'm always trying to cut the cost of data protection, but I need better SLAs because the business is running on these new digital applications. I've got to protect all these new sites. I just want to cookie cutter and do the same thing I've always done. Oh wait, but I've got new applications, so I can't just brute force it anymore. And I'm subject to even greater security and compliance regulations, GDPR, CCPA, more controls around personal information and personal health information. But then I've got these DevOps teams that say they want to be cloning data and applications everywhere around the world. So how do you manage these two strongly conflicting, very exaggerated requirements and still satisfy the business needs? Well, it really comes down to, again, having a platform that can provide a service for you. And the three aspects you want to look at as you look at those services are, first, flexibility. You're going to have more locations. You're going to have more applications. You're going to have more requirements. You need a platform that's proven that it can handle evolving quickly, just as your business does. You're going to want something that's simple. You are not getting more people, you're not getting more time, you're not getting more budget to be able to do data protection. So it's got to be really easy so you can keep up. And perhaps the most important thing is it does have to be mature. Because as the rest of the world around you is moving so quickly, innovating so quickly inside your business, as so many people are trying so many new things, that safety net you've got, that data protection, that's the thing you've got to be able to trust. So that if and when something goes wrong, and something will go wrong, you want to know that at least the data protection will be there to help you recover. So if that's the requirements and that's the kind of platform you need, what might that look like on the inside? Well, from our point of view, again, intelligence is the biggest thing. You've got to be able to make smart decisions about your data no matter where it lives. And intelligence comes from analyzing metadata. So the core of the next generation data protection platform is a metadata engine. It's the thing that can make sure that your data is secured. It can make sure to tier your data to the appropriate types of storage no matter where it lives, that hot tier, that cold tier, putting it in the right region so that you're meeting all your locality requirements and not burning a lot of network bandwidth. But just as importantly, those analytics can also help you understand what's going on in your data environment. So it's not just about optimizing your protection, but it's using the information your protection gathers to help optimize the rest of your environment. And it all starts with this metadata engine. You need something in the middle that brings everything together so you can succeed. So again, why do you need to protect data no matter where it lives? Because bad things can happen wherever your applications run. You need to do it now because these applications and these deployments are spreading throughout your business. And if you don't keep up now, you're never going to be able to catch up. And why do you need a metadata-centric architecture? Because it's the only thing that's got the intelligence to help you scale and achieve the simplicity, flexibility, and stability that you need for your protection. So now that we've covered kind of the future of what data protection looks like, and the future is now, let's shift a little bit to talking about some more specific use cases. And everybody in protection, there's no place better to start than database protection, because protecting databases is one of the hardest things any of us do in the data protection industry. And the great news for everybody is if you thought it was hard protecting your Oracle and your SQL on premises, you've got databases running everywhere now. You've still got the databases on premises, but you've got more and more application developers that are using things like RDS and DynamoDB and Redshift inside of AWS because it's just so easy to use. Of course, you've got some of your DBAs that are in fact migrating their databases and running them on EC2 and EBS. So you've got that same Oracle environment, but now it's running in the cloud. And then if you want to be even more forward-looking, your users that are developing containerized applications in Kubernetes, you can bet they're starting to use their Helm charts to deploy MySQL and MongoDB and Postgres. So you've now got databases running, well, almost everywhere. And so one of the challenges you're going to face is, unless you want to set up 4 different ways of protecting databases in all these different locations, How do you consolidate it? How do you bring it together into one piece? And I'll say, from talking to customers, usually the databases that are running in the cloud, they're pretty open to a cloud-style data protection solution, because if the application's running in the cloud, protection makes sense to run in the cloud too. Sometimes the more difficult conversation, though, is those databases that are running on premises, well, we couldn't possibly protect those in the cloud. Those are data center databases, and they're different. They're special. We can't possibly move those. And the answer is, unless you want to run 2 environments for the rest of your life, you're going to want to consolidate those environments. And it is possible. So, for example, we've got a customer, Premier Networks. Now, Premier Networks, again, very much, we're running our applications, we're running our environment on premises. Could we run our protection in the cloud for an environment that's on premises? Could that even work? Could that perform? Could that be secure? Could that be safe? Could that be cost effective? And so a company that had 80 terabytes running on different VMs and all sorts of different applications, what they found was, in fact, by shifting to sort of a direct-to-cloud model for their data protection, even for the on-premises workloads, backup and recovery ran faster. It was simpler because there was just less to manage on premises, and it was easier to scale. So can you convince your DBAs, can you convince your environment that they should move their protection to the cloud so you can have it all unified? The answer is yes. You have to be able to prove it out step by step, but it's possible. And it's an important step to make, because let's just contrast what it would look like that if you had your database administrator say, well, I am going to start moving my Oracle instances up to AWS because it's a better environment to run. It's more flexible for my compute. It gives me a lot more control and management, and I can scale more easily. But they're not convinced necessarily they want to go to RDS yet. They've decided they want to run their Oracle on EC2 using EBS as the storage behind it. An absolutely reasonable configuration, one we see quite often. And as a backup team, you're now faced with the question of, how do we protect that? And you're certainly not going to take the database that you backed out, that you moved to the cloud, and say, well, we're going to back that up on premises. But if you follow the model of we're going to use our same on-premises model to back up in the cloud, what you're going to find yourself doing is, well, creating a whole new backup environment in the cloud. You're going to install your backup software inside of AWS on EC2 instances, and your deduplication appliance. Now, obviously, you can't put a physical appliance in the cloud, but you'll put a virtual appliance or a software version of it, and you'll have to manage that, the compute plus the storage, and wonder about whether you're really getting the efficiencies you want. And you'll need to do all that just so that you can have an environment that you manage the same way as the on-premises environment. Still not one environment, still not one management console, just a way to try to have similarity across the two. But why are you shifting that entire environment up? Because, and the alternative, again, like Premier Networks, if you've decided your backups all go directly to the cloud, well then as you move your databases to the cloud, guess what? Protection actually just becomes even a little bit easier. You didn't have, when you were backing up on premises, you didn't have backup software to install or deduplication appliances to manage. In the cloud, that direct-to-cloud backup that goes directly into the SaaS service, well, now you've just got an easier, faster network connection to be able to get your backups done. So migrating to the cloud, instead of becoming more difficult or protection becoming a bottleneck, actually everything just becomes easier. And if you can compare and contrast what it looks like, moving the legacy model up to the cloud, you're managing all your backup infrastructure in the cloud. You're only getting the storage optimization, again, within where you have your virtualized deduplication appliance. You're only protecting within the account, unless, like on premises, you're setting up 2 accounts to replicate to. And you're responsible for all the costs, restores, backups, any sort of unusual costs that pop up. The flip side is, if you go with a SaaS solution, there is no backup infrastructure to manage. You're backing up directly to the service in the cloud. And you get the global deduplication with the automatic storage tiering because it's all part of the service. And it's already cross-account and cross-region because it's going to a SaaS service that's somewhere else. And you're only paying one cost, just based on capacity. No matter how many restores you run, no matter how many backups you run, you're just paying for the data you store. One simple, repeatable cost. And the great part is, you really do have one console to manage what's on premises and what's in cloud. It's not two environments, it's just one. So you really can enable your DBAs to start running databases wherever you want. But of course, that's just one type of environment. And we meet a lot of people that say, well, sure, databases, they've always been a little special. They've always been a little difficult. We could see why cloud would make sense there. But we're pretty happy with how we do virtualization backups, and that's going to stay on premises. And then you think about, well, where are you running virtualization today? I mean, sure, you've got your VMware and your Hyper-V on premises, and that's great. Maybe you're even using some of the AWS outposts to reach into the cloud. But if you're running on EC2, that's virtualized. If you're running Kubernetes, whether it's Kubernetes on top of EC2 or you're using the Amazon EKS Kubernetes service, you're running another layer of virtualization. Or you've decided that, well, maybe we're just going to start moving some of our workloads to, say, VMware Cloud on AWS because it's sort of a natural first step in terms of moving to the cloud for my virtual workloads. You suddenly realize, wait, I am in fact running virtualization in just as many environments as I'm running my databases. And just like we talked about, do you want to set up your backup environment 2, 3, 4 times so that you have to manage 4 separate things? Probably not. So the same argument applies to virtualization. Now, in particular, one of the things that we hear from a lot of customers today is there's a ton of interest in Kubernetes. And in fact, managing Kubernetes, it's another layer of virtualization. So not only is it another type of virtualization, not only is it another place you have to back up, but it's another layer of virtualization. And so you can't just back up a Kubernetes cluster. You have to back up the applications inside the Kubernetes cluster. And like we talked about, those applications will include databases. And some of those databases will run inside the cluster. And sometimes your customers, your users, your application developers will link to databases like RDS databases that are running outside the cluster. Guess what? When it comes time to protect, when it comes time to recover, disaster recovery, compliance, the expectation is you're protecting that whole application. You're not protecting a cluster, you're protecting the applications inside the cluster. You're protecting the dependencies of those applications outside the cluster. And you need to do this, again, from the same backup application that you're protecting everything else. Otherwise, again, you're now setting up yet another different environment to have to manage. And so as you think about virtualization, don't just think about what you're doing today. Think about how you're going to move to the cloud, whether it's directly to EC2, whether it's VMware Cloud on AWS, whether it's Kubernetes. You're going to want a protection solution that ties all of those together. And the reason it's so easy to tie those together in a solution, like a SaaS-based solution, is as long as you have that metadata engine, you can pull together the information about the applications no matter where they're running. VMware Cloud on AWS, EC2, VMware on premises, Kubernetes. The metadata can all come together in one place and be handled the same way for the same analytics. So you look at that and you say, okay, well, the metadata is good for helping add workloads, right? You talked about you can add SaaS workloads, you can add cloud native workloads, you can add Kubernetes workloads. So that's great for the extensibility. And again, given small data sprawl and more applications, that's huge. But what else can metadata really do for me? And one of the things that we really try to highlight for people is metadata is actually what unlocks the ability to finally get more value out of your backup data. And we've been talking about getting value out of backup data for 20 years. And for the first time with cloud and with a SaaS-based platform, you can actually start to mix your backup and your disaster recovery in a very real way. So one of the biggest challenges in any virtualization environment is setting up disaster recovery on premises is expensive and complicated because you've got to double your hardware investment, you've got to have an alternate site that's far enough away to be useful, and you've got to have staff that's trained up to be able to use it. Not surprisingly, a very small number of workloads tend to get disaster recovery, and even when the disaster happens, everyone is paranoid that it's going to not work because we really haven't done the amount of testing we should. Enter the cloud and everything changes. Remember, one of the great assets of the cloud is you only have to pay for what you're using. You can spin up resources on demand. Well, there's nothing more on demand than disaster recovery. So you've got your backups in the cloud. Your data is in the cloud. Like we said, next to the most powerful compute infrastructure the world has ever known, this on-demand infrastructure. And so when a disaster hits, you can on-demand do a disaster recovery where you spin up your application on an EC2 instance, and you are able to immediately to start running in 15 minutes or less. So that's great. That suddenly means you can do disaster recovery not just for a select few workloads, but all your workloads. But like we said, one of the important things in disaster recovery is you want to be confident that it's going to work. And the best way to gain confidence is testing and having everybody in the environment test. And that's the beautiful thing with this on-demand environment is you can test disaster recovery whenever you want, however you want, with whomever you want, because each disaster recovery test simply spins up on-demand resources. So you're only paying for the duration that you're doing the disaster recovery, and it affects not the production environment, it doesn't affect the backup environment, and it doesn't affect your ability to spin up a disaster recovery if something happened while you were running your test. Because again, on-demand resources, all separate. So your entire staff can be trained and confident the disaster recovery is going to work. Of course, then you start thinking, well, a lot of times these disasters, they're not just short-term events. They can last, they can leave me in a configuration for days, weeks, or even months. And so when you do your disaster recovery, you want to make sure that that environment is then also protected. And again, you don't want to pay for that ahead of time because not only are we not sure the disaster is going to happen, but you certainly don't want to pay for extra protection for the disaster recovery copy until the disaster is struck. Again, the beautiful part about cloud and SaaS, when that application suddenly becomes live, you can set up on-demand data protection for it and make sure your applications are safe for as long as you run in the new environment. And then, of course, finally, you always want to make sure that you have the ability to get back to your original environment. Now, for some customers, we found they've just decided that the disaster was a forcing function and they're happy running in the cloud, and this was a great migration strategy. But if you did want to run it back on premises, again, you can always fail back and get back to your original configuration. And all those extra copies you had for extra protection, they go away. They stop costing you money because, again, everything on demand. So with this intelligence about the data and about your virtualization, you can now enable a truly secure disaster recovery solution in which you can have confidence. And a good example here is the Katz Media Group. So the Katz Media Group, again, an organization that was basically looking at, we want to be able to move to cloud. Our backups on premises are actually affecting the performance of our production workloads. Because again, if you're in that speeds and feeds game, your backup runs fast, but that puts a lot of load on your production environment. And they were looking for just a smarter way to do their data protection. Again, let's use that metadata to be smarter about what needs to be protected and how to protect it more quickly and how to figure out what to protect. And what they found is not only were they able to get more efficient protection for all of their workloads, but that they were also able to add disaster recovery, which dramatically reduced the recovery time objectives. So they were able to, in fact, again, increase the level of their service while also simplifying the environment. Now, when you talk about metadata, though, and you talk about disasters that can happen, the disaster that's on virtually everybody's mind is cybersecurity and ransomware attacks. And so, any backup solution needs to take into account how are we going to deal with ransomware protection. Because ransomware, frankly, is getting more common and more vicious. So according to recent numbers, there's a ransomware attack about every 11 seconds. And they're getting more vicious in the sense that they don't just come into your account and encrypt your data anymore. No, they come into your account, they exfiltrate some of your most private data, they delete your backups, and then they encrypt your data. So that if you don't pay, not only will you not have access to your data, but they'll also post your most private information on the internet and basically humiliate you as a company. So ransomware protection is absolutely critical. And the first step in protecting for ransomware is always the same, which is you need good, secure backups. And to be secure, your backups need to be off-site, in a separate account, inaccessible to whatever ransomware may be affecting your production environment. Again, with a SaaS application, by definition, all remote. Now, the second thing you're going to want, now that you know your data is safe, is you want to be able to detect the attack because you need to recover quickly. Studies show that if you don't recover from a ransomware attack in about 5 days, 90% of small businesses go out of business within a year. So how do you recover from that ransomware attack quickly? Well, the first step is actually detecting it. And the smaller the footprint of the attack, the quicker and the easier it will be for you to recover. So how do you detect that? Well, one of the things, again, think about your environment. You've got small data sprawl all over the world. There is one part of your environment that is looking across everything, and that's this centralized SaaS data protection. And it can detect unusual access patterns, unusual data patterns, and create flags. And through APIs, feed those into your higher level security systems that can use that and say, yeah, this is starting to look suspicious. Let's start to take action. So now we're detecting ransomware attacks more quickly so we can respond more quickly. And then the last step in responding quickly is making sure that you're restoring your data quickly, but also effectively. You don't want to restore to a point in time where the system was still infected with ransomware. And so again, that same detection system that helps determine that you've been attacked by ransomware is also good at quarantining and saying, don't restore these backups, they look suspicious. So that when you restore your data, you're restoring from a good point in time. And of course, if you ever wanted to just test it out, again, that same disaster recovery, you can create a segmented VPC, sort of test it out, make sure it looks clean before you restore on premises so that you know you're doing the right thing. So secure backups built in. Don't need extra copies, don't need extra management. Ransomware detection filters built in. You don't need to run the metadata analytics yourself. It's generating alerts for your higher level applications. Correct recovery, fast recovery, built in. It's doing it for you so that you don't have to walk through and try to figure out what backups are worth recovering. And so by the use of that metadata, again, the ability to protect from ransomware increases. And an example of this, policy services. So great independent financial advisor, hundreds of thousands of policyholders, thousands of advisors, and their big focus was, we need to be able to recover quickly from whatever happens. And to that small data sprawl point, data in all sorts of different locations, ranging from SaaS applications to on-premises, virtualization, databases, the whole 9 yards. And what they found with Druva is they were able to recover their data 95% faster. And again, because of the analytics, because the metadata, because the visibility, they're also able to better understand their data to help them comply with GDPR and other regulations because they know what's inside their data, because that metadata search helps them keep an eye on what's going on. So metadata is the secret to being able to have scalable protection that works across your environment. And so again, when we think of that Druva cloud platform, no matter what your data source is, endpoints, or on-premises data center applications, or applications running in the cloud, or cloud-native applications, Druva will help you protect them. Start anywhere, expand to everywhere. And once you're in the Druva cloud platform, which is powered by AWS, you can use that metadata engine we talked about, not only to do faster backups, but to simplify disaster recovery. And not just disaster recovery, but data governance, just like policy services to adhere to GDPR regulations. And of course, not just that, but also protect yourself from ransomware and other cybersecurity threats so you can make sure that you're safe from whatever issue heads your way. And so as we look to the future, again, like you said, the future of data protection is already changing. We're in the next wave. You don't want to get swamped in the next wave because you're behind the fact that data is sprawling all across the world into multiple applications. You have a business that wants to be able to move as quickly as possible. Like we said, they're adopting new types of technology. They're adopting new applications. They're moving faster than anyone imagined to try to grow the business. And for them to be able to move with confidence, for them to be able to move as fast as the business needs them to move, they need to know that there's a safety net underneath them, that no matter what happens, their data is safe. So unlike those customers that I talked about at the beginning of this discussion, where it's like, we have a whole bunch of applications we're not protecting. If you can go to them and say, everything's protected, that gives them the freedom to innovate. It gives them the freedom to push the envelope because they know they have a flexible, simple, mature platform underneath them that if and when something goes wrong, will keep them safe. And with that resiliency built in, that really enables them to fully realize the agility that they can get by moving to cloud. So I'd like to thank all of you for spending this time with us. Really appreciate the chance to talk to you. And hopefully we'd like to be able to continue this conversation in person. And so For example, if you were intrigued by any of this, please visit the Druva sponsor page. We've got a lot of great material and a lot of great people ready to talk to you. And hey, if you're even more intrigued, start a free trial. Again, this is a SaaS application. You can deploy it and have it up and running in seconds. We're here for you, and we'd absolutely love for you to take this opportunity to try to advance your data protection. The future is here. It's time to start writing it.